Your patience is rewarded.
Tonight, 2 planeswalkers have been summoned to fight to the death. Both planeswalkers walk into the arena, but only one leaves with their sparks still ignited. The planeswalkers have chosen a commander to represent them and ensure their ability to lead through the blind eternities. Who will amass the greatest army and devastate the competition? Find out on Commander Duel!
Tony opens the game with a fetid Heath. WUBRG plays a Temple and scries to the top. Tony plays a Gravern Cairns. WUBRG plays a Rogue's Passage and passes. Tony plays a Silent Clearing and passes. WUBRG plays a basic Swamp. He taps for X equals 2 to cast the first spell of the game, Animus Awakening. WUBRG reveals a Finale of Eternity and Finale of Devastation, putting both spells on the bottom of his library. At the end of WUBRG's turn, Tony casts Consecrate, paying a life for the mana, to exile Animus Awakening from WUBRG's graveyard and to draw a card. Tony untaps, plays a basic Swamp, and pays another life to cast Solemn Simulacrum, searching for a mountain to put into play tapped. WUBRG plays a Blighted Woodland and casts Hexdrinker. Tony takes his turn to cast Assemble the Legion, paying a life for the mana. WUBRG pays 4 mana and sacrifices his Blighted Woodland to put a basic island and swamp into play tapped. He passes the turn to Tony. Tony adds a muster counter onto Assemble the Legion, creating a 1/1 red and white soldier token with haste. He taps 4 mana to cast Keeper of the Accord. Tony pays a life to cast Swords to Plowshares, exiling Hexdrinker. WUBRG gains 2 life, but takes 3 damage in an attack from Solemn Simulacrum and the Soldier token. WUBRG taps Rogue's Passage to cast Soul Ring. He then taps 5 mana to cast Nissa, Steward of Elements for X equals 3. WUBRG adds 2 loyalty to Scry 2, keeping both cards on top. WUBRG moves to end step, causing Keeper of the Accord to trigger. Tony searches for a plains and adds it to the battlefield tapped. Tony untaps, adding another muster counter to Assemble the Legion and 2 more soldiers with haste to the battlefield. Tony plays a plains. Tony taps 5 mana for Ravenous Demon. He moves to combat and hits Nissa for 5 and 3 at WUBRG. On WUBRG's turn, he casts Tamiyo, Collector of Tales. He adds a loyalty named Hydroid Krasis, and puts the 4 revealed cards into his graveyard. WUBRG taps for 4 mana to cast Hungering Hydra for X equals 3. Tony adds a 3rd muster counter for 3 more soldier tokens with haste. Tony casts Negan, but due to Tamiyo's ability, WUBRG doesn't sacrifice his creature. Tony swings his soldier tokens and Solemn Simulacrum at Tamiyo, killing the planeswalker. WUBRG plays a Sultai land. He tapped for 4 mana to cast his commander, Zaxara the Exemplary. He taps 3 mana and enchants Zaxara with Freed from the Real. The combo allows WUBRG to tap for infinite mana next turn. Tony adds a muster counter for 4 soldier tokens with haste. Tony plays a plains and casts Liliana Dreadhorde General. Tony removes 4 loyalty counters from Liliana, so each player sacrifices 2 creatures. Tony creates 2 treasure tokens from Negan's ability. Tony draws a card from sacrificing Solemn Simulacrum, and 2 more cards from Liliana's ability. Tony swings in an attack with all his creatures, hitting WUBRG for 20 damage. He ends his turn paying a life for Arcane Signet. WUBRG plays a forest. He searches his graveyard for an answer with a card in his hand, and sees he has no way of surviving the next turn, conceding the game. In Game 2, WUBRG goes first playing a forest. Tony plays a Vault of Champions tapped. WUBRG plays a swamp and passes. Tony misses his land drop but casts Soul Ring into Talisman of Hierarchy. WUBRG plays a Sunken Hollow and casts Mistcutter Hydra for X=2. Tony is in trouble. He misses another land, but luckily he can still cast Luminarch Aspirant, adding a counter at the beginning of combat and passing his turn. WUBRG plays a Dimir Filter land. He taps for 2 mana and casts Lightning Greaves. Tony misses another land drop, but stays in the game casting Fleshbag Marauder. Tony sacrifices the Fleshbag, and WUBRG sacrifices his Mistcutter Hydra. Tony moves to combat, adding a counter to the Luminarch and swings for 3 damage. WUBRG uses his turn to cast his commander and equips Lightning Greaves. Tony taps for 3 and casts Zathrid Necromancer. He moves to combat and adds another counter to Luminarch, swinging for 4 damage. WUBRG casts Kodama's Reach, putting a swamp in tapped and playing the island as land for turn. Tony now misses his 3rd land drop, but moves to combat adding a counter to the Necromancer to swing with a 4/4 and a 3/3. WUBRG plays a forest and swings with his commander for 2 damage. Tony adds a counter to Luminarch and swings for 8 damage. In response to the attack, WUBRG casts Beast Within to destroy the Luminarch. Tony makes a 2/2 zombie thanks to the Necromancer and gets a 3/3 beast from the Beast Within. WUBRG takes 3 damage, and at the end of turn, Tony discards Netherborn Altar to fix his hand size. WUBRG plays a swamp and casts Thassa's Intervention for X=3. He chooses the mode to look at the top 3 cards, putting 2 into his hand and 1 on the bottom of his library. WUBRG gets a 3/3 Hydra from Zaxara's ability. Tony moves to combat on his turn, swinging with the 3/3 Beast. WUBRG blocks with his 3/3 Hydra. Before damage, WUBRG casts Solidarity of Heroes to double the amount of +1/+1 counters on his Hydra. Second main phase, Tony casts Inevitable End on the 6/6 Hydra. WUBRG untaps his mana and sacrifices the Hydra token. WUBRG casts Gaze of Granite for X=3. The spell resolves and destroys Soul Ring, Zathrid Necromancer, the zombie token, the talisman, and his own Lightning Greaves. WUBRG does get a 3/3 Hydra from the X=3 spell, but it dies to the spell resolving. WUBRG swings for 2 more commander damage. Tony is down to 1 mana producing permanent. He hits WUBRG for 2 more damage. Tony discards down to hand size, getting rid of Sheoldred. WUBRG untaps for his turn and casts Lifecrafter's Bestiary. He then taps 7 mana for Zendikar Resurgent. WUBRG plays his land for turn, Golgari Rot Farm, bouncing a land back to his hand. Tony plays an Agadeem the Undercrypt tapped and hits WUBRG for 2 more damage. WUBRG scries from Lifecrafter's Bestiary, keeping on top. He plays a forest. He then casts Vastwood Hydra for X=8. He also creates an 8/8 Hydra token from Zaxara's ability. WUBRG draws a card from the creature cast thanks to Zendikar Resurgent, and pays a green mana to draw a card for Lifecrafter's Bestiary. WUBRG taps his commander for mana, along with a few lands to cast Oko the Trickster. WUBRG adds a loyalty to Oko to add 2 +1/+1 counters to Zaxara. The mana is now heavily skewed in this matchup, and Tony is forced to pass his turn, discarding the Ravenous Demon. WUBRG scries to the bottom from Lifecrafter's Bestiary at the beginning of his upkeep. He adds a loyalty to Oko and puts 2 more counters on Zaxara. WUBRG taps for a total of 18 mana to cast Finale of Devastation for X=16, giving all his creatures +16/+16 is enough to make Tony concede the game. Jumping into our final game, Tony plays a Path of Ancestry, and WUBRG plays a Myriad Landscape. Tony plays a mountain and casts Stormfist Crusader, scrying for Path of Ancestry to the top of his library. WUBRG plays a Temple of Mystery and also scries to the top. At the beginning of Tony's turn, each player draws a card and loses a life. Tony plays a Plains and hits WUBRG for 2 damage. WUBRG plays a land and casts Kodama's Reach. In response, Tony casts Opposition Agent. Tony exiles a swamp and island from WUBRG. Back to Tony's upkeep, both players draw a card and lose a life. Tony plays a Rugged Prairie as land for turn, and casts Herald's Horn, naming human. Tony moves to attacks and hits WUBRG for 5 damage. WUBRG plays a swamp and casts Finale of Eternity for X=2, destroying both of Tony's creatures. Tony untaps and plays a swamp exiled from the earlier Kodama's Reach. Tony casts Luminous Broodmoth and passes his turn. WUBRG plays Yavimaya Coast as land for turn. He sacrifices the Myriad Landscape to put 2 forests into play tapped. Tony doesn't get a hit off of his Herald's Horn trigger. He plays the exiled island as land for turn. Tony taps for 2 and casts Arcane Signet. He taps another 3 mana for Zathrid Necromancer, scrying 1 from Path of Ancestry. He moves to combat and hits WUBRG with the Broodmoth. WUBRG plays Dismal Backwater to gain a life. He taps for 6 mana to cast Whiptongue Hydra, destroying the Luminous Broodmoth from the Enters the Battlefield ability and adding a +1/+1 counter to the Whiptongue Hydra. Tony chooses not to reveal a card from the Herald's Horn ability. He plays a swamp and casts Negan, causing WUBRG to sacrifice the Whiptongue Hydra and giving Tony a treasure token. Tony scries to the top of his library for Path of Ancestry after casting Negan. Tony swings a Zathrid Necromancer for 2 damage. WUBRG casts a Capricopian for X equals 6. He plays Dimir Aqueduct as land for turn, returning a land to his hand. At the end of his turn, Tony casts Kaya's Guile, choosing to make a 1/1 white and black spirit token with flying, and making WUBRG sacrifice a creature, giving Tony another treasure token from Negan's ability. Tony takes his turn searching for a basic plains after sacrificing Fabled Passage. Tony swings with his team for 7 damage. WUBRG uses his turn to take a damage from Yavimaya Coast to cast Mass Manipulation for X equals 2. WUBRG takes control of Negan and the Zathrid Necromancer. Tony plays Luxury Suite as land for turn. He casts Liliana Dreadhorde General and removes 4 loyalty counters to have each player sacrifice 2 creatures. WUBRG creates a treasure token and creates 2 2/2 tapped zombies. Tony draws a card. Tony recasts Negan, and both players choose a different zombie token, causing WUBRG to sacrifice them both as Tony makes 2 treasure tokens. WUBRG casts Hexdrinker on his turn. He takes a damage to tap for green from Yavimaya Coast and casts Garruk Primal Hunter. He adds a loyalty to create a 3/3 beast. WUBRG then levels up Hexdrinker to level 3, giving it protection from instants. Tony plays a mountain as land for turn. He adds a loyalty to Liliana to put a 2/2 zombie into play. Tony taps for 2 to cast Charming Prince, choosing to exile and return Negan at the end of his turn, scrying from Path of Ancestry. He skips combat and Negan returns to the battlefield on his end step. Each player chooses a different creature, so WUBRG sacrifices them both, and Tony creates 2 more treasure tokens. WUBRG adds a loyalty to Garruk, creating another 3/3 beast. He taps 6 mana to cast Finality, putting 2 +1/+1 counters on his beast and giving all creatures -4/-4. Tony draws 3 cards from Liliana's ability. WUBRG loses a life from Yavimaya Coast to cast Animus Awakening for X equals 2, putting both cards on the bottom of his library. Tony plays a land for turn and adds a loyalty counter to Liliana, creating a 2/2 zombie token. Tony casts Keeper of the Accord, scrying to the bottom from Path of Ancestry and passing his turn. WUBRG casts Zendikar Resurgent. He then taps his last remaining mana to cast Stonecoil Serpent for X equals 4. In response to the cast trigger, Tony casts Mortify to destroy Zendikar Resurgent. WUBRG draws his card from the cast. He then removes 3 loyalty counters from Garruk to draw 5 cards. Tony plays Blood Crypt tapped as land for turn. He adds another loyalty to Liliana to create a 2/2 zombie. Tony casts Obnixilis Unshackled. He rounds out a great turn by casting Path of Exile on the Beast token. WUBRG is forced to decline the search trigger so he doesn't lose 10 life from Obnixilis' ability. Tony moves to combat and swings a 2/2 and a 3/4 at Garruk. WUBRG blocks the 3/4 with Stonecoil Serpent, killing the creature, but enough damage is done to destroy Garruk. Tony draws a card from the Keeper of the Accord Dying, and adds a +1/+1 counter to Obnixilis. WUBRG plays a swamp and taps 4 mana for Polukranos Unchained. WUBRG uses the fight ability on Obnixilis, removing 5 counters from Polukranos. Tony draws a card. WUBRG uses his remaining mana to cast Master Biomancer. Tony recasts Negan, and both players choose the Stonecoil Serpent in secret. WUBRG sacrifices the creature, and Tony makes a treasure token. Tony removes 4 loyalty from Liliana, and both players sacrifice 2 creatures. Tony makes 2 treasure tokens and draws 2 cards. Tony ends his turn by casting Doom Foretold. On WUBRG's upkeep, Doom Foretold goes off. Tony gains 2 life, and WUBRG loses 2 life. Tony draws a card, creates a 2/2 Knight token with Vigilance, and WUBRG discards a card. WUBRG admits his next play is much worse now that his board is wiped. He casts Finale of Devastation for X=10. He searches for Trigon Predator, and uses the Flying in Haste to destroy the Liliana. On Tony's turn, he taps all of his land and sacrifices all of his treasure tokens to cast Death Grasp for X=17, dealing damage directly to WUBRG's face and winning Game 3 in the best of Commander Duel. Hey all, thanks for watching another Commander Duel. If you like what you saw, please hit the red subscribe button and join the Horde.